This is hosted by Communities United Against Police Brutality and On-Site Public Media. We're hosting you tonight to get the hearings. All of these proceedings are being recorded. Just so you know, we're going to get your story. We're going to do a report and do a report. It's a commission. It's a hearing. We want your testimony. It's something that the city did not do, that Communities United decided to do. So we're doing this because we think it's important to do. Your First Amendment right is to protest, to have your voices be heard, and that should never be interfered with. But I guess we didn't experience that in the aftermath of George Floyd. So tonight, let me just tell you what we're going to do. We're going to have Jordan Christensen here from the Kushner from the National Legal Guild, Lawyers Guild, and he's going to be here, and Toussaint Morrison is going to facilitate. And so and then after that, we're going to have you guys all talk about your experiences and give testimony, and that will be recorded. But let me just say a little bit about who we are as Communities United Against Police Brutality. We've been doing this work for over 20 years, and it's about advocating for people when they need the support the most, the people who are forgotten, and holding the police accountable for what they're doing to people. So we do advocacy, we help families, we help victims, we also do a lot of research, we work on the legal issues as it relates to police brutality, we do a lot of research, and so training and education on knowing your rights. So we got a lot of literature back here on the table, so please help yourself to get the literature, learn about who we are, learn about what we're doing. We'd like for you to be a part of this with us. You know, this takes a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of energy, and we need to be a part of it together. It's going to take a long time to make this system change, and so it takes all of us to do that. So we're going to invite you to take part, learn more about the organization. We meet every Saturday on conference call right now via COVID. So if you're interested in doing that, we got the phone number where you can join on the conference call and take part in that and find out ways that you can help with the volunteering. All right, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mr. Jordan Kushner.
So my name is Jordan Kushner, and I think I'm speaking on as a lawyer in the National Lawyers Guild, which is an organization of lawyers and legal workers and law students and jailhouse lawyers, and we do a lot of work defending people arrested in protests, and that's what I understand is the topic I'm supposed to talk about here, is about the arrests in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. And of course, the coverage in the mainstream media or the corporate media is all focused on this so-called rioting and anarchy and disorder. And it's important to realize that the vast majority of people who were arrested for protesting were protesting peacefully and totally legally. There were many hundreds of people arrested after the murder of George Floyd for the next few days. Most people were arrested. Initially, most people who were arrested, when the way it was recorded, was for what they call probable cause riot, supposedly that the police had probable cause to believe they were engaging in rioting, but there was no evidence that hardly anyone who was arrested was engaged in rioting, so they were charged with what are called curfew violations. People probably have heard about the curfew, and maybe some people who were arrested for it. But there's no. What's unusual about this is there's usually, to arrest someone, you have to have a law on the books, something that was passed by a state legislator or a city council that says this is a crime, and so there has to be some law on the books that you violated. And there's no law on the books that says you have to be home at a certain time at night. There's no curfew law on the books. except, in Minneapolis there's a curfew for minors, or I think for people 15 and under, but there's no general curfew law anywhere that makes it a crime to be out of your house after any particular time. I mean, that's a law that you might have in a police state, certainly not something that we're accustomed to. And so the way this went down is that you have these emergency laws, on the city and state level that allow a governor or mayor to make certain sorts of orders in emergencies. And in the case of Minneapolis, what happened is for the first night or two, the curfew was based on Minneapolis's curfew order, and then it became based on then the state issued a curfew order, and then it was based on the state. So for the Minneapolis curfew order that hundreds of people were arrested for, it was an order by the mayor saying that people can't be out on the street anymore, with a few narrow exceptions like emergency workers or police or people of that sort. You weren't allowed to be on the street, so anyone who was found out in public who the police wanted off the street, they arrested and put in jail. Often people were held in jail for 3 days, because it was over the weekend, for being out at night. Now, to my knowledge, all of these cases in Minneapolis ended up being dismissed by the city attorney if they were arrested just for curfews, before anyone went to court. And that's because they realized that the law, that it wouldn't hold up, because there was no law in the books that makes it a crime to be out of your house at night. There was just an order from the mayor, but that's not how you can make a crime. A criminal offense has to be passed by a legislative body. There was there's a question here. There's ordinance that authorize the mayor to issue a curfew order, but there's no law in the books of Minneapolis that makes it a crime to violate the mayor's order. It's considered a criminal offense to actually violate Minneapolis city ordinances, but nothing that says that violating an order from the mayor is a crime. So you had hundreds of people put in jail, usually for a few days, when they didn't commit any sort of crime. Then, as I said, after the next day or two, the state had its own curfew order, and they had a little bit better covered, because there's a state statute that says a willful violation of an emergency order is considered a crime, a misdemeanor. And so theoretically, if you were arrested for violating the governor's curfew order, if there was reason to believe that you did it on purpose, at least under the statute, it could be a criminal offense. I think that's something that, if anyone is still being charged with that, and I don't know anyone who didn't have their charge dismissed based on that, but that should be challenged on constitutional grounds also, because again, we're not supposed to be a police state, and we have constitutional protections, and the governor can't just decide all of a sudden what's going to be a criminal offense. So I think the biggest story here is the lawlessness of the government, where they deprived many hundreds of people of their rights, of their freedom, based on these made-up laws. And the fact that all these charges were dismissed, I think, tells you something. What it tells you is that this isn't really about enforcing laws. It was about social control, about keeping people off the street, keeping them from protesting, and they can use their police power, so the police have the badges and the guns, to put people in jail for no reason, to get them off the street, when there really isn't any kind of valid criminal offense that was committed. I see someone with his hand up. Maybe I can just kind of a short presentation, so let me just kind of finish up. Just cover a couple of other things. So, the kind of police, abuse in the light of the situation with the protests continued. We had many dozens of people who were arrested at Powderhorn Park for protesting or just being present when the police were dismantling homeless encampments. There were also, as I understand, arrests at other places when the police have dismantled homeless encampments, where they put yellow lines to keep people away, and anyone who doesn't leave or goes within the yellow line gets arrested. Again, they get held in jail. And again, this is a constitutional right people have to observe what the police are doing and to protest against what they're doing. And yet you have many dozens of people who are doing their civic duty really as citizens and as decent people who are concerned about this oppression of people who have no place to live, and they want to protest, or in some cases just witness the police abuse of people in this situation, and then they get arrested. There's also for the National Lawyers Guild, we have many. We have a lot of attorneys, or some attorneys, who are defending people who were arrested and charged with felonies, who are accused of breaking into buildings, and then some. There's a large number of people who have federal charges for arson, where they're accused of burning things down. And without trying to talk about the merits, I'm not going to argue about the merits of what people are accused of doing, but I think it's important to note that the people who are charged with federal crimes are facing huge penalties. Anyone who's charged with arson, with setting any kind of being involved in setting a fire, faces an automatic mandatory prison term of at least 5 years. In some cases, they're trying to get substantially more time for people who are accused of setting fires. In many of the cases, the people accused of setting fires didn't actually do serious damage. In other cases, let's say like with the 3rd Precinct, I think probably a lot of people think that was a good idea. So it kind of depends. But when you look at the that this is an uprising, and what the stakes were, and what the injustices are in society. Certainly the folks in this situation are facing more time than any police who've engaged in abuse. Even the police officers are accused of murdering George Floyd. If they get convicted, they're probably, we don't know how much they would get, but if they got convicted of manslaughter, they probably would not get as much time as the people who are being charged with committing arson, as a federal offense. They'd probably be looking at less than 5 years. I have a client where the prosecution demanded that if he plead guilty, that he would get at least 9 years. That's probably more than Derek Chauvin will ever get in prison. So even where there's people are being charged with actions that are controversial and maybe not everyone would support, it's still important to look at the disproportionality here and the distortions of how the criminal and justice system works, where it works to keep social order and keep the status quo, and anyone who resists the system faces huge penalties, versus, for the most part, people who abuse their power continue to be protected by the system. This is outside the topic of my discussion, but there really hasn't been any kind of significant reform that's been implemented since the murder of George Floyd to change the way that the police act. There's been talk, and almost any proposal, it seems, has been abandoned. I'm glad that people are organizing and try to make sense out of this politically and try to do organizing. And if there's any kind of information I can provide based on the work I do, I'd be glad to try and provide it. So I'll open things up for questions now. Okay.
This will be real quick. I'm wondering what the law thinks about Walz's executive order in coalition with the CDC about not evicting any camps that aren't physically a threat to any of the neighborhoods, in specific PV Park.
Well, that's because it's outside my realm, but I think so I guess I don't have an answer to that question. If it seems like Walz gave the go-ahead and evict people from these camps, and that's why it happened. If he didn't want it to happen, his Attorney General, Keith Ellison, could have easily stopped it. So it doesn't seem like the evictions are being applied to the homeless. It doesn't seem like the ban on evictions are being applied to the homeless people.
Isn't there some legal action we could take against that?
It can be looked into. We did some looking into it and didn't really. It's kind of this. The law does not protect homeless people in that sense. There really hasn't been any. There have been legal challenges in other parts of the country to evicting people in homeless encampments.
What about their Fourth Amendment right?
I don't know that anything has been successful. So what happens is the city or the state passes laws that have the effect of restricting people in certain public places from being able to sleep at night, and they do it under the guise of public safety. And so far I'm not aware that it's been able to be effectively challenged legally.
Okay, I would recommend everybody to read Walz's executive order on COVID, because he clearly states that campments are not allowed to be evicted during this time.
You have it exactly right. They're not to be evicting people from the encampments unless they are a threat to health or safety. So what the park board has been doing is alleging vague threats to health or public safety as the mechanism for shutting down these encampments, and it's absolutely disgusting. It is just shameful because they can't articulate what those are. They just make these vague allegations about health and safety. There have been a few incidents at the encampments, as there will be in any neighborhood. But there are not specific threats to health and safety, and yet they have made these allegations with really little to no basis. You're right, exactly. I'm so glad you raised this stuff. I think it's really reprehensible. And I wish that there would be some challenges to that.
And Mr. Kushner said they do it under the guise of public safety. How would we then challenge that?
Well, I think there has to be some kind of litigation around it, some civil suit. Jordan's the expert here. I'm not a lawyer, but the bottom line is that generally, if you're going to make an allegation that something's a threat, you have to actually articulate that. There has to be some kind of reasonable basis for that. And I'm not seeing it. I'm exactly with you on exactly that, and I'm really disgusted. They keep saying things like, these things are dangerous. Well, what the hell do you think sleeping out in the streets without a tent and without other people to help protect you and build a community of protection, what do they think that's like? Where do they think people are going to sleep? We have the highest number of homeless people in the city that we have had in decades. And yes, 1,200. Thank you for knowing that number. And we have more than we've had in decades, despite all of their, and heading home Hennepin and all their little bold, programs to end homelessness. They're not doing any of that stuff. And I'm really disgusted because they just feel like they can just keep moving people around. And what it does is it destabilizes people's lives and makes it impossible for them to get the services that they need. And right, where they're never going to get any support. The thing about these encampments is about building a network of support. And by constantly destabilizing these encampments, by raiding them, shutting them down, making people move to another place, what it does is it just destabilizes people's lives. They can't get themselves out of homelessness because they can't be anywhere long enough to address the issues that they're dealing with. So thank you for raising that. And I don't mean to take over the microphone. I want you to speak.
I have a suggestion, because as a practical matter, for movement attorneys who are doing this kind of work without getting paid and without any real resources, it's really hard to do a legal challenge to removing a homeless encampment because you don't get any notice of it. The police just decide right away we're going to do it, And so unless you got an army of lawyers like some big corporate law firm,
Or the NLG.
how do you get into court right away? How do you get something ready? And if you do it like ahead of time because you think the police are going to evict a homeless encampment, and you want the court to stop it, then they say, well, we don't have any plans yet. It's just speculation, and they'll throw it out. So you're damned one way, you're damned the other way. So my suggestion is, you got the Minnesota Attorney General's office that's responsible for enforcing Walz's orders, and they do that in many cases. So let's demand that the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, who claims to be the people's lawyer, take some legal action to stop the removal of these encampments, because he's got hundreds of lawyers working for him, and he has the ability his office has the ability on several hours' notice to go to court and stop this from happening, and the court will actually listen to him because this is the state of Minnesota, and even though everyone's supposed to be equal before the law, the reality is when you got the government arguing this is what the law is, it has a lot more effect. So I'm glad you brought this up, and kind of in thinking a lot about this, I imagine this is going to get worse now with the winter and people needing a place to stay. So maybe the thing to do is start making public demands here on the Attorney General to take legal action to protect the homeless encampments.
What about going after a specific target, specifically someone like Al Bangora that ordered the eviction of the camps in coalition with Chief Arredondo?
Yeah, yeah, you can. I think these are all good ideas. I guess my view is that if you want to actually stop them from, maybe you can put enough pressure on these people if you target them to stop them. That might be a decent strategy. People can talk about it, but if you want to try and make them stop, I guess the target I can think of is the Attorney General. He's got this power to force orders, and he does it when it's popular. So he has taken action to stop evictions in general, and he goes after businesses that open. So he could easily go after these police departments and get them to stop evicting homeless people.
And just a question for you while you're up here, because the idea is being floated around about when I interviewed Latricia Vita, the VP of the park board, the repeated statement that came from her was, well, a park is no place for anybody to live. A park is no place for anybody to live. And the idea is that, do you believe that this rhetoric and language is being thrown out? Lean back to mid-May, a lot of folks, especially, just from what I saw, white folks, were celebrating Minneapolis being the #1 parks in the country.
Yep.
And then we come to now. Do you think, and this is just a thought I had, a theory I had, do you think that they may want to be clearing out the camps, the parks, because they may not, because winter is coming in their word for public safety, that it doesn't look good for them if something were to happen, if somebody were to get, get hypothermia, or if they were to have a body on their hands, is that,
Right.
do you think that they're just basically trying to look good going forward?
Yeah, they're all about the clout. When the uprising was happening and all eyes were on Minneapolis, the park board stepped in and said, hey, we can house people at Powderhorn, we can house people at Peavey, and all these different places. And you saw them backpedaling fast, like a cornerback. As soon as the limelight went away from them, they started evicting out people. And even when Powderhorn was evicted, there was still mass media coverage. But now it's all these little camps where there's not as much media, there's not as many volunteers or white bodies, so the evictions become much more violent. And not only that, they start arresting people too.
Yeah.
Tons of people just on BS charges, They came into PV Park with 25 squad cars, MPD and park, and a goddamn SWAT team. At 6 a.m. Wow.
So I wanted to ask Kushner on that. When they swarm a park like that, and even when they do it in the front of the Capitol, which has happened to some of the marshals as well, and it seems that they're getting arrested off of general principle. What are the legalities with that, and how can one navigate being held in jail for a certain amount of time without being processed? How does one navigate that?
Well, you get to the problem where the law ends up being decided by the people with the guns. And so in most of these cases, when people are arrested, the charges end up going away because they really aren't valid. But then there isn't any way to take back what happened, where people actually ended up spending time in jail. If there's a clear enough case, you can sue the police afterwards for wrongful arrest. The courts have mechanisms to make these lawsuits against the police very difficult. They have what's called qualified immunity, where the police can't be held liable unless the law was clearly established, which means there basically has to be some case on the book that says that already decided in that particular situation the cop couldn't do what they did, which is often almost impossible. There were proposals in Congress, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, to get rid of qualified immunity. That hasn't gone anywhere so far. So this is where the system is obviously stacked against people and protecting people's rights. So, if the police aren't, the problem is you can't stop the police from making invalid arrests physically because they got the guns, and if you try and stop them, then you might get hurt really badly and charged with the worst crime. We do have a lot of success in getting charges thrown out or beating charges once people are arrested, if they go to trial, but then that's being re-victimized because having to go through the court process is a big burden. It takes a lot of time. Where you have to go, especially if you go to trial to fight the case, you have to spend days. You might have to spend almost a week or a week in court fighting your charge, and so now they've arrested you for no reason. They've also wasted your time. So unfortunately, I don't have a clear. I'd like to have some good news, but I just don't have any magic bullets here. It ends up being a political struggle to change the dynamics of how things work, and if the police really want to reform themselves, let's get policies in place that prevent them from arresting people for engaging in any kind of peaceful protest.
I will say, last thing, the 5 volunteers and residents that were arrested from PV Park are facing a collective 5 years in jail.
Really? I didn't...
Disorderly conduct, obstructing the peace, 4th degree assault of an officer.
It's the fourth degree assault of an officer. So what happened? So the first charges you mentioned are misdemeanors, maximum 90 days in jail. And hardly anyone ever goes to jail for those. It's a matter of having a record and being found guilty of something you didn't do, which obligates you to fight it. But the 4th degree assault on an officer, what happens is if there's a struggle with an officer, they'll often charge a person with assault on an officer, and if the officer actually has what's called a demonstrable injury, like they cut themselves or something, because it's a police officer, it becomes a felony. So normally if you have a scuffle with someone and someone gets a bruise, it would be a misdemeanor assault. But for a cop, they charge it as a felony, which can carry up to 5 years. I forget if it's like 4 or 5 years in prison. And typically the person didn't assault the police, but they just claim it. They get injured, and then they turn around and say that person assaulted me, and they make it up in the report. And so that's how hopefully they have representation. I haven't heard about those cases. I may be glad to talk about them if they're looking for representation, because that is not something that should be able to slide. I have another case out of the protests where a cop accused someone of attacking him, and we got video that clearly shows the cop jumped on the person and choked him. So it happens all the time where, when the cops want to get someone, they make up stories about the person assaulting the cop where they can really up the stakes. That is a way they really try to repress dissent, in a really oppressive manner.
And this goes to Michelle and anybody else that wants to answer this. How do we end qualified immunity? And then also, how much does it cost to arrest people for no reason and then have them kind of go in and out?
So qualified immunity is a judge-created doctrine. So there were laws passed after the Civil War. They were called the Reconstruction. It was called the Reconstruction Civil Rights Act, there are very broad civil rights protections against abuse of power by the government and discrimination in general. And that much better laws than anything that's been passed, in any more recent times, like including the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s. It means that if the police abuse their authority, if they violate people's constitutional rights, then you can sue them for damages, can get compensated for any injuries you suffered, get sometimes punitive damages, attorney fees. It seemed like it would be a very effective tool for fighting police misconduct. The laws weren't really utilized a lot until like the 60s. And so what happened is since it looked really effective, the Supreme Court made up their own doctrine called qualified immunity, which said, well, we can't just let people sue the police all the time for violating people's rights. So they should only have to pay if it was like really clear that they violated the law. And that's where it becomes qualified immunity. So, probably most cases end up getting thrown out based on qualified immunity, which isn't even part of the law that was passed. It's something that the Supreme Court judges made up to stop people from suing. So Congress, there are two ways that you can get rid of qualified immunity. One is the judges on the Supreme Court can change their mind and say this wasn't a good idea, we're going to abandon qualified immunity. There are even some conservative legal groups that have been pushing for that because, there are violations by the police that sometimes offend certain conservative, at least like libertarian conservative groups also. So far, the Supreme Court hasn't been interested in revisiting qualified immunity. The other way is Congress can get rid of qualified immunity since they passed the law originally that allows people to sue the police for violations. They can amend the law or make an addition that says that their qualified immunity is not a valid defense. And so they can get rid of qualified immunity. And there were proposals, the House of Representatives did pass a civil rights law or civil rights bill after the George Floyd murders that got rid of qualified immunity, but the Republican Senate predictably wouldn't act on it. Now, I don't know if the Democratic House would have passed it if they thought it really had a chance, because they're usually pretty beholden to police also. But anyway, that's something that you can demand that Congress get rid of. There's also another possible solution on the state level. You could try and get the state legislature to pass its own civil rights law that didn't have qualified immunity. I think there have been efforts in that direction in California that have gotten some headway. So there are ways politically that this can be addressed, and so laws can be passed that also have much more broad protections in general against police abuse.
We'll stick with this as I'm sure more people have questions regarding this. So this is basically the People's Commission addressing this. What has been your experience legally or seeing basically the law work its way into your community or into your family or people that you know since the killing of George Floyd? What has been your experience, or even before that as well? Because I know some of y'all have been working in this for some time. But what has been your experience with that, and what do you want to see change about it? And we just heard from Kushner how deep qualified immunity goes on a federal level. What do you want to see changed, and what have you seen that you would like to see changed here in Minnesota, in Minneapolis? So we're just good with everything? We're okay with the way everything's going? Okay. What do you want to see changed?
I know this is kind of an old one, but it would be really awesome.
Just go a little closer to the mic. We can't really.
Sorry, it's kind of short here.
Yeah.
Tall. I know it's kind of an old thing, but I'd love to see if we have to have officers and we have to have that type of law enforcement. It would be really nice if they could be trained. Closer. If they could be trained trained to interact with people without using any sort of assault. So at encampment clearing. I was maced within an inch of my eyeball, directly in there immediately after telling the officer that I was not a threat to him. I was not going to attack him. But his hand was already out on that pepper spray, and it was 7 a.m. In a public park. Like, I don't know why anybody's getting arrested, pepper sprayed, thrown to the ground, like, in the morning at a public park. That's absolutely crazy. So I think if officers cannot be trusted to not use, these outside forces to suppress people, take them away. Like, take away the pepper spray. They use it like it's how they ask us to stop. Like, use your words first. But yeah, so they use that also just as a way, like, it's fun for them. The interactions that I have had, they enjoy that. That's the way that they can get away with. Absolutely, they can't be touched for that because, we were doing something wrong at 7 a.m. in a park. But yeah, so that would be the main thing.
So when you say it looks like they enjoy that, the idea is that were they just like knee jerk quick to just go to macing?
Yeah, I was so surprised by the fact that I had gotten maced in the eye that that was more shocking than the actual pain of it. But yeah, before anything happens, that's what's out. The mace is out.
Do you feel like they came just with the intent to do that anyways, regardless of what was going to happen?
Absolutely. Immediately upon them getting there, I had one of, I didn't know what was going on. I had one of them come up and belly bump me and ask if I had a problem. And then he's following me around. Officers are laughing at what's happening. We're yelling, "Winter's coming, people are going to die." And then they start laughing because, oh, haha, it's a quote from a TV show. And I called them on it, and they don't respond to us as people. They look in every direction other than where we are, or they're laughing. It's really gross.
So I want to end on this with what you're speaking to, because on Nicollet, I saw an officer do the same thing. It was boom, boom, pow over there, boom, crash over there, and then he literally just turned around and sprayed a black kid in the face that was just standing there. And I was like, okay, that didn't seem like the move. He's like, nobody's doing anything. So they come in with that mindset. Culturally, I'm asking you to expand on that. Where are these folks coming from culturally, culturally in the department, that they feel they can pull up and just do that? What do you think is going on with that?
Well, one thing I would certainly speak to is the fact that both, and I'm just going to name them personally because this is from articles I've read, both Bob Kroll, as we all know, has specifically named protesters as terrorists. I had an interaction with Corey Fitch in 2016 in which he was wearing a sweater that said, "Here comes Santa Claus right down terrorist lane." And it was white Santa bombing a bunch of brown people in turbans. So that right there tells me that they are those are two elected people in the police federation. That's the attitude. They are breeding that. They are telling them they are the enemy. They are not people. They are terrorists, which, it's dehumanizing, obviously. So the fact that they're like, oh, I didn't get on the action today, turn around, spray whoever's behind me just cause. When I got sprayed in the eye, I wasn't even near, I was, solid 100 feet away. He easily could have put an arm out if he felt I was running the wrong direction. He felt, he could have done anything other than just reach his arm out into my eye. I think it's a matter of, it's all supposed to be exciting and thrilling, and they're taking out the bad guys. And I think pepper sprays you see videos of cops driving past protesters just spraying out the window when there's nothing happening. You see that just being out on the street. They just use that as a fun little party favor, I swear to God.
Is that legal for cops just to use pepper spray at will?
No.
I have it on video.
It's if they first of all, it's an assault. If you have obviously going up to someone and using something that's going to cause physical harm, for a normal person would automatically be assault. For the police, there's a statute that has an exception for what's called justified use of force. But what you're describing is not a justified use of force. So the police should be charged with assault for doing that. I've never heard of it happening. I've never heard of a police officer charged with assault for pepper spraying someone or tasering someone for that matter. Or
Well, if this person has the video, could that be used against the officer?
yeah. So here's it. It's definitely, and it doesn't happen. I mean, there've been videos of the police tasering people for no reason, and they don't get charged with assault because the prosecutor's offices work with the police, and they see that they're like the police. They're basically an extension of the police. So like that's another demand that could be made from the city council, is probably to set up some separate unit outside the city attorney's office of prosecutors who are there to prosecute police misconduct, who aren't beholden and don't see themselves as an extension of the police. But yeah, so they should be charged with assault. If the system was equal and it enforced the law, they'd be charged with assault for that kind of activity. And then also, you could sue them again for excessive force. And so we talked about the complications of a lawsuit, but that's excessive force. It's a violation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution to use excessive force. It's considered unreasonable seizure. And so, yes, it's illegal, and there are different kinds of remedies. Getting them to work is the more complicated question.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I kind of missed it. I think Toussaint kind of asked how to go.
Speak
about,
just a little closer, sorry.
I think Toussaint kind of asked how to go about tackling the situation with qualified immunity, how much it would cost. He said start with the Congress. I would like to talk to you a little more about like how to like aggressively tackle it. Like I guess legally, of course, but like so if we can't obviously getting rid of their weapons and demilitarizing them is too radical of a request right now. But I mean, definitely like they asked about the culture of these guys coming in to Minneapolis Police Department and clocking in, especially with the narrative going around, not just with Antifa or Black Lives Matter, but just protesters in general. Some of these guys, it's not their job. I feel like inside they feel like it's their moral obligation to suppress dissent.
Sure.
So when they come clock in, it's like it's not just conversing with regular people. It's I gotta suppress these people. These aren't people. These are protesters. And if we can't get rid of their weapons and things like that, we have to attack the way how they hire these people, and then in the qualified immunity. So if they do, the people who feel it's their moral obligation to do this, they slip through the cracks. I mean, they have to be held accountable for.
And as this last person spoke about, seeing them getting enjoyment from it, what's been your experience in kind of seeing the culture, seeing the culture be not only incompetent but somewhat wildly aggressive in wanting to engage in like kind of social warfare?
Oh man, dude. So like, the 25 squad cars that pulled up to PV, like they hopped out with their tear gas canisters, like they smiling, like they wanted it, and then like they immediately cordoned off a public park. When I'm in the back of the transport car. I was one of the five. I was a resident who got arrested during that time. I was in the back of the transport car, and the officers were talking about clearing another camp, Farmstead, and they were talking about, those homeowners, they have $1.1 million houses, and they got to look across the street and see that trash. And it's like, whoa, these people just fell on a hard time in life. And you're saying that these $1.1 million homeowners have to look across and see that's just another person in the community who doesn't have $1.1 million to spend on a house, but they're a community member nonetheless. And to hear these people that are supposed to be enforcing the law and eventually going to be the enforcers to go evict that encampment talk about that premeditatedly like that's kind of scary.
Yeah.
How could you check culture legally in
there was,
force?
yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know that there's a legal way to change culture, but there was someone who wrote a book some time ago about the police, commentary about the role of the police in this country, and it was, the phrase he used was protectors of privilege. I agree with that. I think that they're there to keep that their role, they see it as their role to keep the social order and the economic order and keep things the way they are. That's what they do, and so that does involve a change of culture, and I hope people don't get let go of what's being described as radical ideas, because these are reasonable ideas. And you can pass laws forever, but you have to have a total change in the structure, really, where the police, you have to reimagine what the role is, how public safety is taken care of in society. And, do we need police? In what context do we need police? So I hope people, just because, there's all this fear by establishment Democrats that we're going to lose the election if we talk about defunding the police or abolishing the police. Well, I mean, if that's the truth, I don't think people should run away from it. Do you have to work for other reforms that maybe can be done in the time being? I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I'm used to being stuck with what we have to work within the system, but definitely have a vision, because you can. I mean, whenever there's something wrong, there's laws that are passed, and the problems don't go away. So you have to have a reimagining about the whole social structure in society. And obviously, the police are such a linchpin in keeping things the way they are. And these are especially these MPD people. They've got a fascist mentality, really. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, they're an occupying army. Like I forget what percent live in Minneapolis. I know it's like way less than 10%. They're not part of the community, and
they come from Woodbury and places that are strong on law and
Maple
order.
Grove.
Yeah.
I live in an inner ring suburb, and the police see themselves working for the people in the suburb. They would see themselves working for the people there, and that's obviously not how the Minneapolis police are. So if you had police who actually saw themselves as working for the community, you probably would have different results. And so you have to really change who's hired. And so there was talk about really big ideas right after the murder of George Floyd, and then there's always this backlash, and there was a big backlash where then everything was portrayed as anarchy, and everything's going to fall apart. And it was set up. The police stopped trying to protect the public safety because they wanted to show, okay, well, you criticize us, we're going to just let all these problems happen. And if you had police who saw themselves as there to protect the community, then there actually would be public safety, I think. So you have to have different police officers, obviously, and I don't want to take up. I could talk about this a long time, but I don't.
No, it's okay. Just wanted to. No, it's okay. We just wanted to get to the question this person was asking. Anything else? I know that everybody else has probably had different experiences with the law. Like, this is what this microphone is here for. So, what would you change?
Well, I think exactly that. You said you don't know if you can legally change the world culturally. So I think the only way we'll get change, even if we look at other locations here in America, we can look at Philadelphia, where there's 4 autonomous states that work in tandem together to apply political pressure from basically a new nation completely autonomous of it. And in Minneapolis, I'm going to be quite honest, if we're going to talk about George Floyd, Floyd Square is a joke of an autonomous state where there is homeless residents there that they're trying to rent out buildings to, and they let the petty bourgeoisie open back up, which will only suck out money from a low-income area even more. Honestly, the only thing I want to see change is complete abolition of the police and complete abolition of capitalism.
And then in place of the police, would there be anything? Or would it be how communities were working during the uprising on the weekend of, or just abolition of police is gone?
Anarchism itself does not work. It can work in a small little environment for a little while, but if we look through history, anarchism just does not work. There still is a structure, but it's not based on vertical hierarchy. It's linear hierarchy.
Yeah.
It is that the tools and every single instrument of liberation is owned by the people. And at that point, you can trust the people to take care of each other. There is too much fear. That is what they perpetuate, that if we did not have the police, if we did not have this government, we will be at each other's necks.
Yeah.
We would if it was still a capitalist anarchism or libertarianism where it's like free capital and motherfuckers hire militias that just gun down poor people, right?
Yeah.
So there is a system in place that has to be taking care of the vulnerable. And that simple demand comes from Wretched of the Earth, Frantz Fanon, what is considered the Bible of the Black Panthers by Angela Davis. Yeah. He says there's only one simple demand that we always must remember. It is the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. And that means taking the exact place of the oppressor and putting them on the bottom, and taking their spot and pushing forward actual decolonizational steps. That it's not a metaphor. You know, the land should go back to the indigenous peoples, and for at least black culture, it's a little harder thing to grasp around because that is where imperialism actually succeeded. Imperialism finally erased a whole identity because they took an indigenous people from Africa, moved them here, and taught them three simple things being Catholic, you know, Catholicism, capitalism, and the U.S. government. And so that's why we have the point of petty bourgeoisie that come into Floyd Square who sell $11 T-shirts, profiting off of their own people, profiting off of a death of a martyr, really, an unwanted martyr. They profit off of them the same way that these nonprofits do, go to homeless camps and say, hey, for a little bit of unemployment, we'll put you in a house. So I see everything that this summer as merely a bandage on a much more disgusting disease.
And not just a bandage, is it also to pacify?
It's
what's
to
going
pacify.
on as well?
That's the point of the bandage. It's like, you're okay right now. You know, we have this little bit of, you know, AIDS, so, you know, be thankful. But I'm not going to thank my masters for anything. I'm going to take from them.
Yeah. Okay. And then moving forward, somebody had an idea, and somebody told this to me recently, and people can speak on this if they want. They said an idea to deal with policing legally would be firing every single officer. Fire every single one of them. And then if they want to come back, they have to interview with the community that they want to police in. And the community, you know, sits down, asks them questions, does a background check. Oh, did you mace people for no damn reason? Oh, well, you know, sorry, you can't police here. We don't want you here. You're sorry. Oh, you killed somebody. No, sorry, we can't have you on the force. Which seemed, if there is no fear, as this last person spoke, I mean, like, hey, we can do without police for like a few months, maybe a few years, who knows? And we have them interview back. Is that something that's possible? No? Okay. Talking about pacifying, the idea, a lot of protesters have said there's no going back. So for you, like, again, we'll take like one or two more people just to answer this question. If there is no going back, what do we want changed? What do you want changed in the law going forward? Talked about qualified immunity. We also talked about excessive force. We talked about basically fifth or fourth degree assault just for trying to defend an unhoused encampment. What do you want to see changed in this city that you've seen? What? Legally, yeah, go ahead.
So I live here in Richfield, just right up the road here. And a year ago, the police killed Brian Quinones.
The police killed who, sir?
Brian Quinones.
Yep.
And then, after George Floyd was killed, the police department put out a letter talking about how great they are. It was disgusting.
Why do you think they put out that letter?
They wanted to placate people, and what I wanted to bring up was the fact that the city of Richfield, the leaders of the city of Richfield, closed ranks around the police department to protect them from consequences from the murder of Brian and from unrest resulting from the murder of George Floyd. So they need to be held accountable too. The mayor, the city manager, and all the city council people who are trying to protect the police. We need to put pressure on them as well.
What does accountability look like?
They need to answer to the community for not holding the police responsible. And they need to fire the officers that killed Brian. And they need to be open. They need to get rid of the police if they're not willing to accept any kind of criticism or accountability.
Okay, so getting rid of police that are basically killer cops
Exactly.
is one step. Would you take it a step further and say charge them?
Oh, yeah, charge the whole. I mean, yes, absolutely. Fire, charge, convict, put them in jail, and the city leaders in Minneapolis, Richfield, and elsewhere also need to be held accountable. And right now, they are also protecting the police, so we have to do something about them too.
Okay, Mr. Kushner, why is it so tough to charge and convict cops for murder? And how can we make it less difficult to do that?
Well, there's a few reasons which we touched on. One is, what's related to qualified immunity is, the Supreme Court has said that in order for the cops to be convicted, their actions have to be objectively unreasonable, which is kind of related to this clearly established law idea. So whereas, if regular people get into dispute and someone kills someone, but there's no legal justification, then they're going to be guilty of murder. But in the case of a cop, they've got this additional legal protection where it has to be found objectively unreasonable, and then depending on the situation, these additional criteria that are applied that can be used to justify what the police did. So that makes it really legally hard to convict cops of homicides. But then even getting them charged is a big challenge, because the prosecutors who look at these don't look at the cops the way they look at other people who kill people, because they work with the cops on a daily basis. They identify with the cops. They see things the way the cops see them. They don't see it from the point of view from the oppressed person who's on the street. They see things from the point of view of the cops. And plus, the prosecutors who do the cases, their bosses are elected officials who usually get in office by pleasing trying to cater to the police as well. And so, like, you have the Attorney General in Kentucky who refused to indict the cops that murdered Breonna Taylor. He's a Republican Attorney General, and so he's there to please the cops. He's not there to vindicate anything on behalf of the community, the press community. So you have to have people politically, who are in charge, that are committed to the people and not there to serve law enforcement interests.
And so how do we get like a separate entity to indict officers? Is that possible?
Yeah, you can have a special, there should be a separate unit that's responsible for investigating and prosecuting police misconduct. Okay. And so sometimes, for a particular case, you could have a special prosecutor, but you could, for a longer term solution, you could have a special unit. Wisconsin set something like that up, actually. I'm not sure how that went or how it's been used, but you can have the legislature set up a separate unit, prosecution unit, that looks at police misconduct, that hires people who aren't looking things at from the point of view of the normal prosecutor who's an extension of the cops, but someone who actually people who actually want to enforce civil rights.
Okay, thank you. All right. Anybody else's experience? What has your experience been with law enforcement or the legal system here? And what would you want changed about it? We'll take one more person before we go into kind of the next topic and wrap up. There's a microphone right here, no?
Hello. I'm Noah McCord, and I just wanted to respond to that question. My experience with the legal system is fairly extensive. I have high-functioning autism, and I feel like in many ways the legal system, in Minnesota specifically, because I've seen it in other states as well, just through a research capacity more so. But in Minnesota, it's much more insidious than it is in even Alabama and Mississippi, where I feel like they really do prey on socio-economic status, that where if you have the money for a lawyer, you're going to get a much better deal than someone who's not going to be able to afford a lawyer. I have also found that once you stand up to them once, they generally leave you alone, or they become slightly better at picking fights with you. I had an issue with the city of Chaska for years, and I just got real mad one day. And I sued them, and I sued them over and over and over and over and over and over. And now they don't fuck with me anymore.
Did it work?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
But it's like most people don't have the money or the finances or the resources to do that. And so most people just get stuck. and then they get railroaded. And so I feel like it's very much that when we talk about Minnesota being this like nice, comfy, warm place, I feel like it's very much a warm, comfy, nice place for white folks who have money. So that's all I had to say about that.
Thank you. And so moving forward with that, it brings up an interesting point. So when you don't have money, when you're preying on socioeconomic, basically socioeconomic warfare, you're encouraging that. The question is then, you're handed a public defender. And recently, Mary Moriarty, who is a public defender, I believe in Hennepin County, was let go due to some of the rhetoric that was thrown out. She was let go because of her participation in the movement. So now we're seeing a public defender fired from Hennepin County because of their outspokenness in the movement of disparity and racial disparity, class disparity, neurodiversity, lack of neurodiversity in law enforcement. How does that make you feel to know that your county is actively working against those who are trying to uphold the law to the highest degree? What happens now? Like, how does that make you feel? Like, seriously. Microphone's here for you. Yeah, we need at least two other people other than Michelle. Before Michelle comes on, we need two other people. Your county is actively working against you. What does that say about the future of Minneapolis? Like,
yeah, I've been watching this for a while and listened to the board meeting where she was voted. It was, they voted to let her go. She is someone who, for 6 years, as she served on this as the chief public defender, she never had an evaluation in 6 years. So I'm going, well, she must have been doing okay, right?
yeah.
So that was one thing.
So did she
Another
just
thing
get an
was
evaluation now?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's
Okay.
what this was about, and because they had her, what do I want to say, suspended with pay for a while. Also, okay, so some of us from CUAPB and other organizations, Nakima, Levy Armstrong, went down to her office, which is located not in a government building, and when we tried to go up to her office, for the office, they wouldn't let us because they said it's a private building. I'm going like, oh really? This is highly irregular. Yeah, so that was another example. What was the other thing I was going to say? I'll let Michelle take it over, but this is absolutely wrong, and we really need to act against this. We need to do a demonstration or something because it's totally wrong.
Absolutely, absolutely. And real quick before Michelle comes up, I want to ask just a question for one other person to come up and address. What does it actual? So let's say Mike Freeman gets recalled or doesn't come back or whatever happens. Basically scurries back into a hole and is never seen again. What do you want to replace Mike Freeman? What does a DA that's going to prosecute the police look like? Like, what do you envision for Hennepin County's future district attorney? Like, what do you want from that person? It's fine the way it is. You guys just want Mike Freeman to come back, or? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just gonna say I feel like it needs to be someone from the community.
Someone from the community?
Yeah.
Well, Mike Freeman lived in Southwest Minneapolis.
Well, he obviously isn't part of the community, no matter where he lives. It's not. He's not representing what people who these things are affecting, their needs.
Were you able to read the letter that he wrote to Nakima,
No,
Levy
I
Armstrong? He wrote a letter that said, because he was basically taken off the case for sloppy behavior, or sloppy work, and the letter he wrote to Nikema seemed very, very, very dissociated from what is actually going on, and he used the term, yes, I found it, it seemed legal to charge these police on their activity, but it didn't meet criminal activity. So where do you think, you're saying that he's not part of this community, what is somebody that's part of this community and not dissociated, what do you want to hear from them? Like, what would happen?
I think stuff like this, where we're actually talking to, everyday people, stuff like this is really important. So I feel like one of the biggest issues that we're having pushing forward any of these goals in our movement is that there's kind of the people who are facing these oppressions every day, and then there's everyone else. And people are kind of just pushing this away and kind of wanting to sweep everything under the rug. So I feel like that disconnect is one of the biggest problems.
Yeah, maybe somebody that's like having forums or like a community, like in person. Cool, thank you. Peter, or Dave, you want to speak?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we all know the problems with Mike Freeman, and there's a lot of problems with him personally and how he's handled it. But a lot of the part of the problem is with the system, where the DA is the guy who also makes charging decisions for the police, or of course never makes charging decisions for the police. Any kind of police criminal activity should be in the hands of someone independent, not someone who has to work with the police every day to make their cases. That's just an obvious conflict there. And so this has got to be put in the hands of someone independent. And it's also got to be looked at that the police behave in many criminal manners. And people don't even look at this as being criminal. But once their conduct, their use of force, whatever it may be, or perjury or something, use of force, if it's not justified, they have no more right to do that to people than you or I would have.
Okay.
If it's not required as part of their job, it is a crime. It's interesting at the Office of Police Conduct Review in Minneapolis. There's a deal where a complaint will go to the Internal Affairs Unit if it could be of a criminal nature. Well, pretty much any complaint of excessive force could be of a criminal nature if you decide that the officer wasn't doing it. But it's never even thought of in that way. So it's more a systemic change.
Systemic change.
Yeah. And just while I'm here, I thought I'd make an interesting note. I discovered we've been talking a lot about qualified immunity.
Yes.
Now, Ruth Bader Ginsburg twice voted in two separate cases on the Supreme Court to expand the definition of qualified immunity.
Wow.
We don't have a lot of friends.
So Ruth Bader Ginsburg voted to expand qualified immunity. What would that expansion look like?
Oh, that it was even less possibility for an officer to be sued for their conduct.
Wow.
More of he had to know specifically that this very specific act, not just this general thing, but there had to be a case exactly like this before.
Yes.
In order for the officer to have reason to know he couldn't have done that.
Yeah, and I've heard of that as well. That sounds like less accountability.
Yeah.
Peter, did you want to come up and speak and say something? Not just in the lane of sound. You can talk too.
So to your most recent question, what would it look like? I can only really second what Dave just said, in that due to the relationship that the DA has with the police, there's a conflict of interest from the get-go. So they cannot be the ones that are in charge of holding people that they collaborate with on a regular basis accountable. I mean, you've seen that. I mean, that's what Me Too was, right? Everybody needs to do what they need to do for their career, for their job, so they'll look the other way if that means that they stay employed. And let's face it, to be a good DA, you need your police to work well with you. If you have a contentious relationship, you're probably going to get drummed out of the system. as we saw with the gal that you all were talking about. I can't remember, Mary, I think it was.
Mary Moriarty, yeah.
Right. So to the question that you asked before, you know, what do we do if we don't get change? You know, you can burn it down, right? That's an approach.
Okay, sure.
I think that if you look at that holistically, that's a waste of resources. But it's valid. It's totally valid. I think the thing that comes to my mind is, not in this case national, but given what the future may look like, it should be national, but a citywide strike. I mean, just if everything is based off of money, if we live in a capitalist system and they're all here to protect property and the privileged money interest, and it is a socioeconomic class warfare, then the solution seems to be interrupt that process by any means necessary, right? So that means, we can shut down a highway for half an hour, but you know, it's more a matter of like people purposely saying, no, I'm not going to work. And I'm going to take that hit in my comfort, and I'm going to take that hit in my personal sacrifice. And it has to kind of be like a consensual mass thing. In lieu of that, I mean, direct action, I feel like every time they raid a park, then perhaps we, you know, consider decorating another precinct. I think that, you know, there are ways without torching things, which again, torch the symbols of the state, whatever. I'm not really that opposed to it, and there is a time and place for that kind of tactic, I think, especially when you're talking about, you know, 400 years of oppression. So
yeah, and it sounds like 38th in Chicago has gone on strike as well, in a sense. It's, you can't come in here, you can't have this space. You want the bus, your $80 million D-line to run through here. You want to run fiber optics through here. You have Public Works show up and then hand out a survey where there's 3 options and none of them reference the modern day lynching that occurred with George Floyd. So that space in and of itself does it seem kind of like a strike to you?
It's an occupation. It feels like an occupied autonomous zone. Yeah, every time I've been down there, that's since the get-go. I've never been down there been like, I remember when we were down there, I took a friend down there who hadn't been, and we were walking back, and one of the neighbors at the corner was out there with their kids, and like half joking was like, oh, how have you been sleeping? And I was more referencing the fireworks because this is pre-4th of July, but we kind of like got into a more involved conversation, and they were not happy. They did not enjoy their main complaint was the constant noise and the violence that they perceived that was happening outside of their house. And and they were like, we're talking to our council person, or representative of the district or whatever, somebody in the governmental entities section about fixing this. And I looked at him and I was like, I don't think you understand. Like, this is not fixable. Like, you're not going to get that intersection back until there's fundamental systemic change. And the dude just laughed. He was like, ha ha ha, that's never going to happen. And I was like, well, I guess you're not going to get your intersection back. Like, maybe you should consider moving.
There you go, yeah.
You know, so, I mean, there are a lot of solutions depending on your flavor, but ultimately I think, like, a citywide or statewide strike, and it, you know, you need to back unions. That's part of it. It's a multi-pronged approach. You need union support.
Yeah.
Because if you can shut down your buses, your trains, and your planes, that's really where you're going to grind and create serious friction with the people that have money and power, because they're not going to be able to move around.
Okay, thank you for that idea, citywide strike. Yeah, no, go ahead.
The other thing that we really just need to recognize is a lot of these problem children, the mayor, the DA, all of these people are elected. Every single one of them. And this may seem like an oversimplistic answer, but vote the bastards out.
Okay.
And we need to stop looking at people's like party affiliation and start looking at people's records.
Yeah.
Because you talk a lot about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she's like the hero of the liberal movement. And if you look at some of like Justice Scalia's decisions, Justice Scalia had some pretty decent decisions on the ADA in prisons. And it kind of shocked me. But what you come to find out is that it's not really about red or blue, just about common decency. Yeah. And if your public officials aren't going to exhibit common decency towards like fucking anybody, then you just need to get rid of them.
Okay.
And so, I mean, I hate to sound like overly simplistic, but again, vote the bastards out.
Okay. Will you be running for city council anytime soon? No comment? Okay. Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. So Toussaint, you said earlier, what was the feeling about Mary Moriarty?
Yeah.
So just kind of coming back to that one. Honestly, the feeling I had was that sounds about right. And all I mean by that is, system and power is linked together so much. And so it sounds like this is somebody who's not working in the confines of the system. So let's get them away from the power, which is crap, right? This is the problem.
Yeah.
And I think when you were talking about, I don't have solutions, I don't have answers, but my feeling on it is, when you were talking about criminal justice system and all this, we're really narrow. It is the criminal justice system where justice could have so many different forms.
Mm-hmm.
And it's disappointing to think that we might try to work in other ones because that one's so broken. I don't know, though. Could we? I guess I just think, how can the community come together to think about new ways to do this that brings a few more people closer together? And then I guess the last point I guess I'd make on this is when you ask about Mike Freeman, disassociated, the type of person that I'd like to see in that role would be somebody who, so what is he? He's like I have been in my life too, right? Disassociated with a lot of these issues that are being talked about here.
Yeah.
He's very associated with that system and power.
Yeah.
How do we get to that point? I mean, what Noah just said is we vote better people in, we recall this kind of guy. I don't know how to do it, but that's what I want to see.
Well, to go backwards in your question, it's going to be interesting to see, like we thought Keith Ellison was, the people's champ. And now Keith is, like in the beginning it was presented as such, right? It was that's the product that was like given. And it was like, hey, black, Muslim, lives on the north side of Minneapolis. And in politics, it's kind of about, like the aesthetic at certain points, it's like, hey, this is what the product you're getting. And I saw a lot of language and rhetoric go towards, wow, the people's guy. We got to go with him. Now, fast forward to now, wow. This is the person that could reopen so many cases, yet does not. This is a person that could really tomorrow, like with just the swing of a pen, change the way that we culturally, the institution of St. Paul and Ramsey County could change it, but does not. And then to backpedal a little bit, you said the system is like a thin lane, and Mary Moriarty was stepping outside of it, and like boots on the ground, being in situations like this. So are we then saying that any elected officials or people that are elected in a certain positions of power, it's almost against their interest to be in these community forums?
I mean, I think there's no doubt that that's proven.
Yeah.
I think that the question is how can that change? I mean, I think it can change. I'm not a hope abysmal person here. I'm just saying, Keith Ellison, Barack Obama, great in some different. I mean, Barack Obama, I love him, but at the same time, he was a system guy too.
Yeah, many people were deported under his.
Yeah, he's a system guy, right?
Yeah.
So. Yeah, and you guys are talking about Ginsburg, right? So these names that we can hold up, it's true. And so I guess I'm just going to come back to so how do we add more community elements? Because it's the disassociation element, I think, that's the hardest, right? We're not all gathered like this. How do you get your friends, bring people in? That's what I'm thinking about, to have these conversations, to be part of it. This is what doing it is about.
Yeah.
That's where the hope is.
And thank you so much for sharing that. I really think that's an achievable bar for people to get to. Hey, do you want to show up to a community forum? Yeah, I'm sure you could do that. That's like saying I condemn white supremacy. That is a very low bar. That is the easiest thing folks can say right now. It's like, okay, could you do a little more than just condemn all evil and white supremacy?
Unless
let's
your name
raise
is
it up.
Donald Trump, by the way.
Huh?
Unless your name is Donald Trump.
Unless her name is Donald Trump? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go, yeah.
He had some struggles with that condemning white supremacy
It
thing.
didn't look like he had.
I
He didn't even look like he was struggling. He was just that.
He
Yeah.
wasn't going to do it.
No.
So, and I'm sorry, I hate to jump in. First of all, I just want to tell people that we're almost wrapping up because it is getting colder out here, and we were scheduled to end at 7:30, so we'll wrap up soon. And we know it's cold. But I do want to throw out a couple things. One is, well, not like that. Apparently not like that. Breaking everything right over here.
There you go.
Thank you. This stuff was not meant for a 4'11" person. You know what I mean? So, okay, okay, there we go. A couple things. One is I want to talk about Mary Moriarty because I think people ought to know what the real reason is of what happened to her and why it happened. She did two things that pissed off the system, bluntly. One, and it wasn't just coming to community forums and all that stuff like this.
Just a little closer to the mic.
Okay. It wasn't about her like coming to community forums and stuff like this, though they didn't like that she had such a high level of engagement with the community. But Mike Freeman said a while back that he was going to get her job no matter what. And the reason he said that is because her office, she specifically, was challenging them. They have a history, the prosecutor's office has a history, especially under Freeman, of withholding what's called exculpatory evidence. And exculpatory evidence is evidence that would possibly free that person or make them be not guilty, right? Evidence toward their lack of guilt. And she had a history of demanding that they, and they're required, by the way. The prosecutors are required to release that evidence if they have it, and to fail to do so is called a Brady violation. The Hennepin County Prosecutor's Office engaged in many Brady violations, including that they used for over a year a woman, a nurse who was a sexual assault nurse with Hennepin County Medical Center, who had been fired because she had lied about her credentials. And for over a year, they continued to use her as an expert to get prosecutions in these cases. And that's a grotesque ethical breach. It's a grotesque, Brady violations. And she challenged that, and they didn't like it. And Freeman said, "I'm going to get her job." Wow. And we know he is very powerful, despite his interesting history of chemical abuse and his interesting history of being corrupt. And the people, frankly, hating the guy, in the Twin Cities area, or in the metropolitan Minneapolis area, he's highly regarded, strangely, in the outer parts of the county, which is how he keeps getting reelected.
Yeah.
So we have to do some work out there. But that was one of the reasons. The second reason is this. 20 years ago, roughly, the Hennepin County Public Defender's Office was brought under the state public defender system. And under that state union. So the people that were working at the public defender's office when that happened stayed in the old union, and the old union is the same union as the prosecutors' attorneys in the prosecutor's office. The new union is the one under the state system. Well, the attorneys that are working under that new union, they make $26,000 a year less than the prosecutors.
Wow.
So there's a huge disparity. And so when Mary Moriarty raised this and said, there's a problem, my people make $26,000 a year less than the people we fight against, then that really pissed off the State Public Defenders Board. And literally one of the people, it was Judge Helen Myers, I was shocked to hear this, she said, Mary Moriarty's campaign against the state system must be put down. Wow. Put down was the word she used. To me, it was like, that's what you do with a dog, not a human.
Yeah.
I was sick by it, to hear the way she talked about her and the way they all talked about her, because she didn't play nice with all the other justice partners. I don't want her to play nice with those other people. Now they're going to put some, sycophant in that space that's not going to stand up for the community, that's not going to stand up against the racism in that system, which is what she's always done, and all of this. The funny part is, as Jan mentioned, she hadn't had a performance review in 6 years. All of a sudden, they bring her into the office in December and say, "Oh, you have been a bad girl, so now you're going to get suspended." Blah blah blah, and then they got rid of her, and it's so sickening. It's like you hadn't had a performance review in 6 years. You don't even need a lawyer to sue their asses, okay? I hope you do.
Could Mary Moriarty run for DA?
She. I don't think she'd want to. She loves public defense. Her father was a top public defender. Here's the other thing. People don't know this, but her office has won numerous national awards for the quality of the public defense that they provide.
Okay.
And so she's widely trusted. So this was a really disgusting move on the part of the State Public Defense Board.
Yeah.
We objected to it. We wrote letters. I testified at the hearing on Wednesday. All of this stuff like that. And they didn't care that 175 community members and all kinds of national and local organizations wrote. and the Attorney General wrote to support her, and several legislators, and the police chief, and on and on, right? They didn't care about that. They actually had a debate about whether they should make any consideration of the letters and the communications they had received on her behalf, whether that should play into their decision making whatsoever. You know, so this tells you like how these damn systems are. So the gentleman that was talking about abolishing the police, you know, it does need to happen at some point.
Yeah.
We're not ready for it now, and what we have to do is figure out a lot of things, because you can't just abolish. Yeah, that's for damn sure. But the thing about abolishing the police is this. People have to have a way to have access to the court system, particularly people that are being harmed, like if like victims of domestic abuse, child sexual abuse, and child abuse, and financial abuse, and you know all these other abuses, right? Have to have a way to access the court system, and the way you access it now is through a police investigation. So if we were going to abolish police, we'd also have to do a lot with the court system. But you know, that's not to say it can't be figured out.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, let's make some changes to do some harm reduction.
Absolutely.
So just so people are aware, because you know I get this all the time, like, why were you against the charter amendment? Well, the damn thing was written to be illegal, so we can have that conversation another time.
Yeah.
Right. But what our position is deeply downsize the police.
Yes.
Deeply downsize them. Efficiency studies show that for patrol officers, 60% of their activities are self-generated, which means they're cruising around town harassing people.
Yeah.
So we could probably get rid of 60% of cops, okay?
Yeah.
Downsize them deeply. Redirect those funds to more appropriate responders like mental health workers for mental health crisis calls, social workers for homelessness, medical people for drug overdoses, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
And then the ones you have left, rein them the hell in with real accountability measures.
Okay.
And that's our position. So I just want to like throw that out. And these things could all have been done before George Floyd was killed.
Yes.
But the city has chosen not to do anything. And since then, they think they're putting the damn genie back in the bottle. It's up to us to show them that they're not.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for wrapping up on that note. So it's getting super cold, and then we're like 15 minutes over 7:30. There is another forum next week on Friday. What park? Theodore Worth Park. Okay. Theodore Worth Park. Thank you so much for joining. Please DM CUAPB or On-Site Public Media if you have any questions about the next forum, and we can just kick off with them right away. Thank you so much for the time.